Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show, Election 2020. This is our special series on election issues across the state of Colorado and as well ballot issues in Denver. Today we're going to be talking about Proposition 114, the reintroduction of gray wolves into the state of Colorado. You'll notice the set is different from what you're usually seeing, and that's because we have a number of COVID-19 protocols that we've reviewed with the governor's office and with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So I'm actually more than 6 feet away from my guests. Most guests prefer to be as far away from me as possible anyway, so this was actually working out quite well. What I do want to remind everybody to do is to make sure you're registered to vote for the November 3rd election. You can register to vote online. The Secretary of State's website is fantastic for getting all the information you want, and your local city and county clerk, for example, your county clerk and recorder has also those opportunities for you. And if for some reason you fail to check to see if you're registered, you can verify if you're registered online. You can, even after you vote, you can track your ballot online using an app on your phone or on your computer as well. But if you don't do any of that, you can still actually register to vote on Election Day. As long as you do it before 7 p.m., you can register to vote and cast your ballot that day. So most importantly, regardless of your party affiliation or if you're not affiliated with any particular party, please be sure to vote. All right, we're going to talk about wolves, gray wolves in particular, and I want to know why it's gray wolves, but I want to introduce my first guest for Proposition 114 in favor of reintroducing gray wolves is Delia Malone. Delia from Redstone as well. You came a long way. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure to be here. I always love to talk about wolves.
All right, well, you are our wolf expert in sheep's clothing. How's that? And speaking against the measure is Taylor Szilagyi. Taylor is with the Colorado Farm Bureau, one of my favorite organizations. Taylor, thanks for being here.
Aaron, thank you for having me.
As a voter, I think one of the first things that struck me is, and Delia, I'd like you to talk about the proposal, is why are we voting on gray wolves in a statewide election?
Well, the real question is why have we waited so long to talk about gray wolves and to get wolves back to our state? We're talking about gray wolves in a statewide election because over the decades that we've tried to reintroduce wolves, the decision has been thrown into the hands of politicians. So Proposition 114 takes the decision to restore gray wolves out of the hands of politicians, where it's been for decades, and puts it squarely back into the hands of wildlife biologists from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, where the decision belongs. Colorado 114 directs that the restoration be managed by best science to accomplish sustainable populations of wolves, and that they be managed as a non-game species, which all is according to best science.
Taylor, why is this a bad idea?
Well, I would argue that this doesn't put Initiative 114 in the hands of science. In fact, it takes that away. Not only does this simplify a very complicated wildlife management question that has been debated for years and years, and multiple times our wildlife experts have said wolves don't belong in Colorado. Now it simplifies it into a yes or no question, asking everyday Coloradans to make important and complex decisions that impact the livelihood, the futures, and frankly, the success of our economy and our farmers and ranchers on the western slope. And it ignores all of the decisions that Colorado Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife have said over the years.
So let me ask a couple of questions. And in terms of where this would mainly occur, is it fair to say, Delia, that most of this activity would occur on the western slope, that people on the Front Range aren't suddenly going to see packs of wolves?
The initial reintroduction would occur on the west slope on public lands, and that's an important concept. The public lands on the West Slope, about 17 million acres of public land on the West Slope, belong to all of us, whether we live on the Front Range, whether we live in Redstone, Colorado, whether we live in New York City. These are our public lands, and for too long, those public lands have been managed by politicians. I want to step back and say something about what Taylor said about the decision to not restore has been CPW decided that. No, CPW did not decide that. The commission
Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Colorado Parks and Wildlife. The biologist did not decide that. The commission decided that. And the commission are political appointees. There is not a single scientist on the commission. 114 directly says that wolves be managed with best science by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. That means that the biologists, the specialists, will be involved.
Why do we need more wolves?
Well, wolves, for 5 million years, wolves occupied all of North America, and wolves were the most important factor in the development of the rich, incredibly rich biological diversity that occurs in the West today. Wolves moderate prey populations, elk and deer. We have more elk and deer, about 700,000 total in Colorado, than any other state in the lower 48. By moderating and moving prey populations, our ecosystems restore, biological diversity recovers. At a time when biological diversity around the world is crashing, what science has documented is that where wolves are present in sufficient numbers, with sufficient abundance, and they're present for long enough, we see recovery of biological diversity. We see forests rejuvenated. We see water storage enhanced. In a place where water is critical, in a place where across Colorado, our state forester documents that aspen groves are declining. One of the main reasons for that decline is an overabundant ungulate population, elk and deer, and inappropriate livestock management. Wolf restoration has been shown with decades of credible science to reverse those declines. That's why we need wolves back to Colorado to restore the health and diversity of our ecosystems that have been degraded since their loss.
Erin, this notion of balance is really interesting. I think that went out the window when humans got here. Our Colorado is a very different place than places like Yellowstone, places in northwest Colorado like Montana and Idaho where wolves have been introduced. There's negative impacts there, no doubt, but that is a very, very different place than the western slope of Colorado. And I wish wolves could say, oh, public lands, yeah, sure, we'll stay here, but they don't know that. They're animals. Colorado farmers and ranchers have been living on public lands, using public lands, and working with places like Colorado Parks and Wildlife and endangered species that we've put there for years. We know how complex it is. We know how hard it is. And now we're asking Colorado voters to say yes or no, a simple question. And that's not fair. That's not fair to the western slope. That's not fair to folks here. What we need to be doing is looking at places like Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, like you said, them listening to science. They've had the opportunity to put wolves in Colorado, and they said no. Most recently, in the Obama and Hickenlooper administration. That's not a political conversation from their end. They're looking at science. They put them in Montana. They put them in New Mexico. They put them in Wyoming. They chose not to put them in Colorado here. And so instead of having a biological conversation here, Erin, with you, I'm not a biologist. I know you're not a biologist. We should be referring to them, not voting on this via the ballot.
So to be clear, Taylor, I am an ecologist, and ecologists look at the entire ecosystem. They look at interactions. To be very clear, the result of wolf restoration in the Northern Rockies has not impacted the livestock industry. In 2015, out of 1.6 million cattle in the Northern Rockies, in wolf country, 148 confirmed losses to wolves. That's 0.01%. In fact, when we looked at the evidence, the elk population has actually increased in the Northern Rockies by 40,000. In fact, the evidence shows us that in Wyoming, the elk population is 29% over their goal. In Montana, 50% over their goal. In Idaho, 17 of 22 elk hunting units are over their goals. In fact, tourism has increased. The economy has actually improved because wolves are the #1 attraction in Yellowstone National Park. In fact, in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is about the same size as the west slope of Colorado's public lands, about 17 million acres, greater Yellowstone ecosystem supports 500 wolves with only about a total of 200,000 deer and elk. The west slope of Colorado needs wolves. I've done biological surveys across the west slope of Colorado for the past 20 years. I've seen the decline in the aspen. I've seen the decline in our riparian vegetation that stores the water. I see that Colorado needs wolves.
That's great that you've done that, and you should be talking to Colorado Parks and Wildlife about it. We shouldn't be voting on it. And to go back to the very beginning of what you said, a rancher doesn't raise their cattle or their sheep to be killed, whether it be 1 or whether it be 800. I think if you look at Coloradans Protecting Wildlife and the coalition that we've built, this isn't about farmers and ranchers solely. Yes, their livelihoods are at risk. They're in the 8th year of economic decline. Their farm incomes are half today of what they were 5 years ago. So now we're asking the rest of Colorado to put the nail in the coffin for our farmers and ranchers out west. But you look at the people that have come out opposing Opposition 114. They're business coalitions. The Grand Junction Chamber of Commerce, the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, and 40 different counties across this state have said this is not a good idea. This is not how you do wildlife management. You don't do it via the ballot box. You do it with experts like yourself. If you're an ecologist, you should be talking to other ecologists and the experts, not us.
So has there been at any point, and I thought you intimated it, but has there been at any point a recommendation or a decision by Colorado Parks and Wildlife in regard to reintroducing gray wolves in the past, several years or whatever?
Yes, they've said no multiple times, the last being in 2016, I believe, so not long ago. They've looked at this issue. They had the opportunity, particularly Fish and Wildlife on the federal level as well. Wolves were introduced in the other states, like you mentioned, not via the ballot box. This would be the first time ever. But professional wildlife managers have decided to put wolves other places, and they specifically chose not to put them in Colorado.
So importantly, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, again, it's the commission that made that decision. It was the commission in 2016 that said no.
But the commission has been appointed by multiple different administrations. To be clear, this is not just a political issue on that front. The ballot box makes it even more political. They have wildlife management experience.
To be clear, there is not a single commissioner that has any science background, period.
So I understand your point about the commission itself, but what did the scientists, the biologists at the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, at Colorado Parks and Wildlife in the state agency itself, what have they in the past recommended?
Currently, they have not made any recommendation whatsoever. Let's look at Colorado State University and they're an agricultural university. We go to Colorado State University, they have put together a robust, research-based, evidence-based website called Carnivore and People Coexistence. They have documented the facts, the evidence, and their scientists are supportive. Most, can't say all, but most of the wolf biologists in North America have come down in support of wolf restoration to Colorado. Even one of the most preeminent wolf biologists in the world, Dr. David Meach, has come down in support. I think it's important, again, 114 takes the decision out of the hands of politicians, which is where it's been for decades. It's why Fish and Wildlife didn't restore wolves to Colorado. That was not a biological decision. That was a political decision. This puts the decision in our hands. This is the public. Yes, I hate the word unprecedented. It's so overused, but I'll use it. Never before have the people said enough. We want science. We don't want science deniers.
So it's Fish and Wildlife. You're talking about the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, right? So what is their recommendation in the past or currently? Have they ever made a recommendation about wolf introduction? And if so, if either of you know, what was that recommendation?
Well, I do think it's important also to remember that Colorado Parks and Wildlife, not the commission, Colorado Parks and Wildlife can't comment on the ballot initiative because it's a political move. Right. It's a political move. So the scientists can't choose. CSU can make as many decisions as they want, but ultimately this circumvents the scientific process. I don't believe in the scientific process. A ballot initiative or a vote by the people who don't know what wildlife management is, when it's convenient and nice for them to go to the West Slope and maybe see or hear a wolf and then leave, they're making this decision. They are making the decision for those living on the Western Slope. They're telling Parks and Wildlife, listen, you may have said no, but now you have to do this. So look at the science and try to figure out how to make it work. That's what this ballot box biology does.
So let me ask you some quick questions. One is kind of just out of my own curiosity. Are domestic dogs descendants of gray wolves?
Absolutely, 100%.
They are. Okay, that's 100%. I just had that recollection from some obscure fact that I knew. Where can either of you give me an example? I'm big on being worried about the theory of unintended consequences, that we may do something we think is good and then there are impacts that we simply haven't considered. So let me start off with, where have we in the U.S., whether it be wolves or other species, where have we reintroduced a species and have it considered successful? And in the case of wolves, Taylor, you were drawing a distinction between different places where this is done. But have there been other places where we've reintroduced a species and it has been successful?
We have a great example of a successful reintroduction with lynx. We have a good example of an unsuccessful, unintended consequences of an introduction of a species that was never here. Only occasionally wandered into Colorado.
So one of my concerns is, my understanding is that in terms of numbers, elk herds are down in Colorado. Is that correct or is that wrong?
Well, mule deer herds are down. Elk herds are bigger than they've ever been. So important to understand that one of the reasons, and the decline of mule deer herds is a problem. Many complicated interacting factors. One of those factors for the decline of mule deer herds are an overabundant elk population. Elk outcompete mule deer for forage. Another reason is oil and gas development and so on and so on. The major food resource for wolves in Colorado would be elk. Importantly, wolves both moderate population and they move elk. And what we've seen, the evidence that we've seen from 25 years of fact and research and observation in Yellowstone National Park and other places, Banff, Algonquin, and so on, is that yes, occasionally wolves eat a cow. 40 approximately, if we would have the same depredation rate in Colorado as they do in the Northern Rockies, ranchers could expect the loss of about 40 cattle per year out of the 400,000 that exist on the West Slope.
What about, and Taylor, jump in at any time, please. One of my concerns is that because of climate change, we have drought in Colorado. Drought's lasting, longer and longer. It's more serious. It's impacting certainly the farm and ranching economies in our state, which are so critical to our state economy and to the lives of so many people here in Colorado. But drought also impacts elk herds. It impacts deer herds, et cetera. And on the assumption that our drought challenges are going to increase, which makes those populations more tenuous, those populations more susceptible to illness, to lower reproductive rates, et cetera, does it make sense to introduce a predator when those animals are now going to face and are already facing more serious challenges simply due to environmental changes.
It's incredibly complicated, Aaron. It is incredibly complicated. And farmers and ranchers on the Western Slope have a long history of working very closely with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to manage endangered species like the black-footed ferret is a great example of the great partnership to ensure that wildlife populations are hopefully growing and thriving. Something we haven't talked about today is the fact that wolves are already here. Colorado Parks and Wildlife has a management plan for wolves that are wandering down into the state. We've heard and we've seen the news headlines that there are confirmed sightings of wolves. Parks and Wildlife gets over 100 reports of wolves every single year. And the fact that we can work with our farmers and ranchers and everybody recreating and living on the Western Slope can work in partnership with our wildlife managers to ensure that these wolves that are coming here can remain viable. And we may not like it, but they're here. Why force more? Why take something so complicated that we're sitting here talking about, climate change and changing climates and water and wildlife populations and put it on the ballot? This is so much more complicated than a yes or no vote. And it's incredibly important that we don't circumvent this process and do this once again.
So does it make sense to, with wolves coming into the state, and obviously in very small numbers initially, would it make more sense to let that process happen more organically, holistically, and as it were, populate Colorado just based on what's already happening?
So let me respond to your first question before. What the evidence documents, we're not talking just 25 years, but the evidence since the mid-1950s when Dr. David Meach started studying wolves, the evidence is incontrovertible. Wolves make elk populations healthier. And in the face of a changing climate, wolves also make landscapes healthier. The way they do that is by moving elk, by moving deer, so that they don't overbrowse, so that the vegetation can recover, so that stream bank vegetation can recover, so that beaver can come back and do their magic and store water. So that's two. With regard to the evidence, again, wolves, yes, they will disperse. Yes, they will move, and we hope they will move. With regard to Taylor's contention that wolves are going to come back into Colorado on their own, what we've seen is that over the decades, only a few have made it across the Wyoming gauntlet of human guns and traps. Wyoming classifies, except in the little corner of Yellowstone, Wyoming classifies wolves as a predator that can be shot, trapped, killed in any way, as many as they want, all year long. 6 made it across to Colorado at the beginning of this year. 3 have already been killed, so there's 3 left.
I don't think Parks and Wildlife has confirmed.
Yes, they have. 3 left, even if there's 6. The best thing that we could do, we know that all of those 6 were as closely related as brother and sister, which means that if there's any inbreeding, they will be genetically inbred and not very healthy.
So if we reintroduce wolves, what does that mean? What are we actually doing? Are we bringing wolves to Colorado?
Yes, we would bring wolves. Probably, states like Idaho and Montana would love to get rid of 2 or 3 of their wolves.
They would, because they don't want them there either.
It would be a slow process where a few wolves...
Why do they want to get rid of their wolves?
Because there are folks up there that believe in the myth that wolves are harmful. They believe in the myth of wolves are going to be harmful to livestock and harmful to elk. The evidence does not support the myth. The evidence is that elk get healthier. The evidence is that the livestock industry has not been harmed at all. 148 cattle out of 1.6 million.
Delia, the fact that farmers and ranchers would lose even one, again, farmers and ranchers are in the 8th year of farm income decline. Agriculture is currently the 2nd largest industry in this state. Farmers and ranchers on the western slope are now fighting this ballot measure because they know that this could be the nail in the coffin. If other states are trying to get rid of their wolves, they don't want them either. The western slope is not Montana. The western slope is not Yellowstone. We don't have the budget to be able to ensure that wolves know the property lines of what public lands are. We don't have the budget to tell farmers and ranchers, oh, you lost one cattle, which could be that line that puts them under. It doesn't matter if it's 1 or 200 or 300. This could be what ends them. And we're not even asking them to be a part of the process. We are asking the rest of the state to decide their fate, to decide their future, and we're asking for taxpayer dollars to do it. During a time when we should be focusing on COVID recovery, only in 2020, right? And not only are they now having to face this, but they're having to recover from just this devastating year.
So one of the provisions of the proposal is that if a farmer or rancher loses an animal, the state will reimburse that farmer or rancher. Of course, you know, the process of getting reimbursement and all that, I'm sure is not something you fill out a form and get a check the next day. But why should taxpayers pay for the animals that wolves, and I know we have to wrap up in just a couple of minutes, but why, let me ask you, why should taxpayers have to pay for the animals that wolves kill?
Well, let's step back just a little bit and say that if ranchers would choose to use coexistence strategies, simply using cowboys and cowgirls to manage their livestock, what we've shown up in the northern Rockies is that losses often go to zero. Remember that we're on public lands, that ranchers use public lands, and the cost to taxpayers is substantial. Their revenue from public land grazing receipts is around $2 million. The cost
in Colorado?
In the West.
In what area when you say in the West?
The public lands, BLM.
In Colorado?
Across the West.
The entire West?
Yes, because they're only paying $1.35 per cow-calf pair per month.
Farmers and ranchers also only earn 10 cents on
the revenue. The revenue is about $2.1 million. The cost to taxpayers to fund the grazing receipts program is about $140 million. We're already paying quite a bit. But if the point was that if ranchers would choose to use coexistence strategies, they don't need to lose any livestock at all.
Right, but if you're hiring more people, that's obviously an expense as well.
Aaron, let me say, if we could train cattle to do what they wanted, I wouldn't have missed basketball games. I wouldn't have been late to school to make sure our cattle were back inside when they're on the highway. I think we're getting away from the sole issue. No matter, farmers and ranchers have a long, rich history of raising their land, raising food on the western slope. And this issue and forcing wolves into the Colorado Western Slope, who are already here, ensures that we don't follow any sort of traditional scientific process. It takes that out of the hands of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and it forces them to do it. You
both have covered great ground. I know we're past our time, so I unfortunately have to conclude the show. But I want to thank Delia Malone for joining me today and giving us a lot of great information, and Taylor Szilagyi from the Colorado Farm Bureau. Also really appreciate your time. So this is Proposition 114. Please read the information in your state ballot book. It's also online, and we're talking, of course, about the reintroduction of gray wolves into Colorado. So make sure you watch our other programs with all of the state ballot issues and discussions of them, and make sure you are well informed when you cast your vote. And as I've mentioned many times, be prepared to spend quite a bit of time filling out your ballot this year. So on behalf of Election 2020 here on the Aaron Harber Show, I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber. The goal of my show is to inform viewers about a diverse range of topics, from our country's leadership to economic and tax policies to energy and environmental issues, with the participation of the most significant stakeholders in each arena. Our long-form approach gives each guest the time to fully speak his or her mind and gives the audience all the facts, allowing everyone to draw their own conclusions.
Thank God you do your homework, and just doing what you do is enough to begin to let them know what's happening.
I strive to bring together guests with perspectives from across the entire political spectrum to promote problem resolution through civil discourse.
Keith Olbermann and Glenn Beck and Rush Babe, frightening people and using emotion, fear, guilt, and racism. What a bunch, from the right and the left.
I've personally experienced our democratic system from the inside, and I use my knowledge and expertise on the show to get clarification of major points and expand the discussion to ensure my audience gets the uncut truth.
What is this bigotry against a third-party candidate? Do the two parties own all the voters and everyone else should shut up and stand in line?
We were on the campus together at Princeton University. Her Majesty does not look any different than she did in those days, and I wish I could say the same about myself.
I'm an ardent supporter of transparency in government and strive to play an active role in bringing out all the facts related to our nation's most challenging issues.
One of the things I've learned in life, and you certainly have learned from doing your show, is you got smart people, but they're torn apart, they're polarized. You get into a media environment where it's not things like your show, but the shout shows on talk radio or cable TV, in which there's just this tendency to score political points and be polarized.
Since my days in national talk radio, I've upheld a tradition of being truly nonpartisan, something which seems rare on the airwaves today.
Depending on your point of view, a decision of the Supreme Court might be the wrong one.
I've also found my guests talk to others involved in our nation's leadership, and they have encouraged them to come on the program as well.
We are not final because we're infallible. We are infallible because we're final. Now, no one knows what that means. What it means is we do not have the last word because we are so brilliant. We are, of course, brilliant, but only in the sense that somebody has to have the last word.
It's the focus on issues rather than personal attacks that makes guests comfortable and gives them the chance to tell their entire story. I simply let guests explain their perspective completely, then dig deeper for the audience by drawing from my own knowledge and experience.
Democracy succeeds when you're giving more and more things to people, but the years ahead we're going to have to ask more of them in taxes and expect less from government.
There doesn't seem to be anyone in either party that has any kind of appetite for asking more of people tax-wise. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're probably right, and that's a flaw in democracy.
Thanks for taking the time to check out the show. I hope this has been helpful in illustrating the nation's need for a balanced, nonpartisan program to shed light on today's issues. For more information, please go to www.harbertv.com or email producer@harbertv.com. And thanks for watching.